Hello everybody that's joined so far. This is Chris Booth from IT Health. We haven't got everybody on the call yet, so we're just going to give it a couple more minutes before we make a start. So just bear with us. That'd be great. Thank you very much. Hi again to those people that are just joining. It's Chris Booth from IT Health. We're just giving it a few more minutes for any remaining people to join us. So bear with us. Thank you. Okay, I'm sure there'll be a few more people may join us over the next few minutes, but we'll make a start. Obviously, we've got an hour to get through the content, and we want to make the most of everybody's time. So thank you for everybody for joining us. And this is Chris Booth from IT Health. I'm joined by two colleagues from Imprivata who will introduce themselves in a second or two. That's Andy and Victor. And just a few housekeeping things. We are recording this webinar, so we'll send out recordings to you when we've finished. If you have any questions, please pop them in the questions box. And if you've got anything else you want to raise, then please raise your hand or drop something in the chat box, and we'll deal with that. But we'll deal with those questions at the end. And at the end of the webinar, there is a short questionnaire. If you could fill that in for us, that would be wonderful. So again, thanks for joining us. We're really excited to be hosting this webinar with Imprivata. We've worked with Imprivata IT Health now for well over 10 years and done some great projects with them. And this kind of mobile piece is really, really exciting, especially the piece around managing mobile devices. So Andy, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you, and then I know you're going to hand over to Victor from there. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, really appreciate you inviting us to do this webinar with you. You know, as you say, we're one of our longest standing partners in our international business, and we have a great relationship and love working really closely with you. So yeah, my name's Andy Wilcox. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for our international business. And we're going to be talking a little bit about our mobile solutions across both the iOS and Android platform. And the majority of the presentation actually is going to be my colleague Victor, who I'll hand over and let introduce himself and get going on it.
Excellent. Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Chris. So my name is Victor Pizzolato, and I run mobility for Imprivata Mobile Solutions. Just a quick background on my experience. I know there's a lot of IT folks on the call, which is great. Great to see a lot of attendance on the technology side of the house. But I worked for Mobile Iron for about 7 years on the technical side, doing large-scale healthcare enterprise deployments, both in the US and in Europe. And even though I'm based in New York, I run global operations for the mobile side of Imprivata. I worked at GroundControl, which is probably some of the requests that I've seen come in for about 2.5 years prior to our acquisition, right? We got acquired in January by Imprivata, and now we have a multi-OS solution. So now I'm running mobility for both Android and iOS for just the mobile division within Imprivata. Just a little background on my experience and what I've done. So just from an agenda, the next 30 minutes or so, what we're going to try to do is we've gone through introductions. We want to go just a quick overview of Imprivata, what our vision is, how mobility plugs into healthcare and why it's so important, and especially your experiences, your pain points and challenges as well, and how we can address them. And then, as Chris and Andy has mentioned, if you have questions, we would be more than happy to address them. We could put them into the chat window as well on the back end of the presentation. So for those of you that are Imprivata clients already, you probably understand we're a digital identity company, right? From a mobile perspective, how this plugs into Imprivata and why Imprivata actually saw us as a great fit is that mobile has the same concepts of lots of people on mobile devices, right? Using technology to access healthcare information. So that was the premise of what Imprivata does and does very well with digital identity. And we've taken mobility and applied the digital identity components to this to be able to apply and provide the same type of connectivity, same streamlined clinical workflows. So this is what we did at GroundControl. We rebranded our name now. We're Imprivata Mobile, of course, and we do this on multiple OS. So obviously, you have different initiatives. Each organization, we've spoken to quite a few already. I looked at the list, and I can see that we've had some initial discussions in a few areas with a few people. But the objective here is to talk about the security at the endpoints, which is your different types of mobile solutions, right? How we handle compliance, audit, and risk, right? And then how does that impact, right, your clinical workflows? So you have users, right, that need to adopt the technology so they don't become frustrated. We want to show how there's productivity enhancements, cost reductions, right, and how we address the clinical burnout and provide a consistent clinical workflow and process. So that's part and parcel of what the presentation will show and how we do this very effectively at other healthcare organizations. So real brief on Imprivata, if you know them, this is probably a refresh. If you don't, with 8 million users and 2,600 global customers, right, in 45 countries, obviously we have offices in the UK as well. Global operations are out of the United States. The mobile partnership and the mobility component of what we introduced was on Android initially in 2017. And then they acquired GroundControl once again earlier this year to round out our multi-OS solution as well. We have a portfolio of solutions which you're probably utilizing today, like single sign-on and multi-factor authentication and identity governance. So these are some of the other portfolio, but what we're going to talk strictly about today is really the mobility side. So what does that mean? And you may have seen this in a presentation by one of Imprivata sales reps or colleagues, but really, healthcare started off years ago, right? We just had to address in a local environment, your clinicians in the hospitals or the wards, right? Using just workstations or cows, whatever the terminology that you would use, right? And they were using thick client applications. It was really simple. Not simple, but it was a lot easier to manage than being on a mobile device. And then we progressed to lots of users, clinicians. Now we have patients, right? We have transport people. We have doctors and physicians, right? We have lots of healthcare individuals in different roles that need to be able to access healthcare information. And they're not just in the hospital anymore, right? Now they're in clinics, they're in outpatient locations, they're going into people's homes. So we need to be able to manage the access, the technology and the access to the information for those users across those locations, right? They're using multiple devices, Android, iOS, Windows devices. They're using desktops, laptops. So we need to be able to, once again, manage that across those disparate types of technology and devices. And we're no longer using just thick client apps, right? With applications, they're virtualized, right? We have web applications, mobile applications. So with that, requires a lot of governance and compliance, right? So now we need to not just provision the applications, but also the devices that they're being utilized on, right? And in mobility, that can be a challenge, right? They're not sitting within the local area network, right? You need to have better controls over where those devices are and where they're being governed, right? So who can access them? Having multi-factor authentication, which is as a digital security company, we do very well. And then the clinical workflow is really, how do I single sign on into applications to streamline the workflow and the process for clinicians so they become more efficient, right? Reduce burnout and be able to service more patients in less time. So this is what we've incorporated into our mobile solutions. It's not just the provisioning of the device, it's being able to manage it, being able to create a very efficient, simple workflow and govern it, right, from the time the clinician uses the device to the time they stop using it. So what are the priorities? We have hundreds. I mean, you have thousands of clients as an Imprivata organization, but from a mobility standpoint, we have several hundred clinical clients, right? And they span the network of, a 100-bed facility, outpatient facility, to tens of thousands of multi-location hospitals and clinics. So we have a broad range of healthcare organizations that are using Imprivata Mobile. But these are the top reasons why they're using them, and this is in line with the services in our portfolio of digital identity capabilities, right? So with COVID, we've all experienced this no matter where you are, right? There's lots of additional pressures to service patients with less people, right? You need to have a more efficient clinical workflow that works very well and is simple to use. You still need to maintain privacy and compliance. That hasn't gone away, right? Even though you've had an increase in requests, an increase in devices, increase in clinical requirements. Cybersecurity, with all the attacks that are going on, people are still trying to access and attack people's networks and mobile devices. Lots of man-in-the-middle attacks that we need to address, right? And then we have limited resources and budget, right? So the resources and the budget have not increased, but we need to do more with less. And some of the things that we're going to show you today will allow you or enable you to do so. So out of the portfolio, if I mentioned, we have identity governance, single sign-on, and then we have integration with single sign-on already with OneSign, multi-factor authentication, patient identification. You may or may not be using some of these products, but today we're going to focus just on shared mobile devices. So when I started about 10 years in mobile, once again, I worked at Mobiline. I was working with the first 50 clients that were deploying mobile device management. Of course, the terms and the names have changed. Right now, we're up to UEM instead of MDM. But the industry is projecting that 97% of clinicians, they're going to be on mobile. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that they're going to stop using their desktops or laptops. It just means there's going to be a lot more mobile introduced. And it's happening, as we speak, into environments that you're going to have clinicians that are probably going to be using both, but the mobile footprint is going to increase to the point where a good majority of all clinicians will be using some form of mobile access to information by 2022. And what that really means is we need to do the things that are typically the challenges within healthcare, right? You still need to improve care, the quality of individuals. You need to reduce clinical burnout. That's a big problem across most healthcare organizations. Compliance doesn't change, it only increases. Administrative burden and lowering operating expenses. So part of what we do when we build a solution, it's not just to solve one of these problems, it's to solve most of these problems, right? A good solution will address a good majority of the items that you see here and do it in a very effective way. So who's using us? So we have some use cases that Andy is going to address from customers that are using Imprivata Mobile in the UK. The healthcare logos that you see up here, some of them you might identify. So I've worked with Johns Hopkins 2 years ago, right? They're expanding their footprint into Europe and the Middle East as well. Cleveland Clinic, HCA is the largest healthcare organization in the United States with 180 hospitals. And then we've got small ones, right? But at the end of the day, these healthcare organizations have all the same typical challenges that you do, from provisioning the device, governing the device, creating streamlined clinical workflows, and protecting the security of the data on those devices over the course of its use. And so we're in healthcare predominantly. That's a good majority of our customers. We're also in other industries as well. Shared device challenges are across other industries. There we go. So when we start talking about mobile devices and how we provision, for all you, like I said, predominantly most of the people on this call, from what I see from the registration, are on the IT side. So if any of you have had to register, right, and provision devices, you've been through this task. It's not simple, it's not easy. If you're doing 50 devices, sure, you're going to do this manually. If you're using MDM, because we're MDM agnostic, whether it's Workspace ONE, Mobiline, Intune, Citrix, right? I mean, a host of different MDMs. We complement MDMs. We are not, we don't compete with MDMs, so we're agnostic, which is a good thing. So you can have different MDMs or migrate to different MDMs. But the objective here is, this is a big challenge. With MDM and DEP, you still need to be able to stage and have some manual intervention on how you use the actual devices and how you provision them into mobile device management, DEP. So we take the pain out of this because we have an automated solution that allows you to plug in hundreds or thousands of devices, right? This is the first point of provisioning, is I need to get 1,000 or 2,000, 5,000 devices out to the wards, to my clinical staff. And how do I do this effectively? So this is what Imprivata Mobile does very, very well, right? Without any manual intervention, right? There are additional stages that are part of the actual device lifecycle management, but this is typically the first one and the most challenging one that IT needs to address. So some of the other challenges with provisioning devices is the device is out in the field, and now I have to do OS updates. For any of you that have done OS updates, and you can trigger an MDM command to update the OS on the device, that becomes challenging because you don't know when that device is in use, right? You're in a clinical 24/7 operation. That device cannot go black in the middle of rounding a patient, right? So we've learned from years of experience with healthcare that the best time to do OS updates, app updates, and make changes to devices is between shifts, because we know that the device at that point is being charged and it can be synced and updated, right? And staged and ready for the next clinician when they pick up the device. So we've learned that OS updates work very effectively. They're very fast because they're being done over the wire, not over the air. And we'll explain the architecture of Imprivata Mobile, which is a bit different than MDM, but it's much more efficient. And it's also very decentralized, which means you can have one location, you can have hundreds, and we'll give you some use case examples of what this means, how this translates into being much more efficient. But the objective here is to reduce the amount of time, failures, and resources that are utilized to do device lifecycle management, which is the OS updates, the app updates, and also break fix. So break fix is another big challenge in healthcare. What we typically see is that devices that are shared, right? The clinicians put them into airplane mode or put into another mode because they have access, right, to those settings, and they disable the device. It could be it could be accidental, but they're not technicians. They don't understand how to troubleshoot the device. So what do? They either need to pick up another device, which means you need to have a spare pool, a percentage of spare pool of devices for the clinicians in each ward, right, to address those challenges. Or you utilize a self-heal, very simple method that Imprivata Mobile provides, which is you toggle basically a button on that device, and you place it back into a dock, and we'll talk about docking devices. But you place it back in the dock and pick up another device, and that device goes to a self-heal, a 5-minute reprovisioning. And that's how we solve the problem of devices that are in a bad state. You don't have to go out and search for the devices. You don't need to bring them back and retrieve them and fix them. It's all being done because the clinician has a very simple workflow. Press a button, plug it back in, and pick up another device and do your job. So these are the main challenges that we've seen. These are the things that we've built around some of the challenges that customers have addressed to us over the years and said, how do we solve these problems? We have limited resources. We need to do more work with less people. And how do we solve these problems and automate the process and make it simple for the clinicians? Because if we don't make it simple, they're not going to adapt the technology. And if they don't adopt the technology, then obviously we're going to have the need for either more resources or we're going to have greater challenges and frustrations, right? So the technology that we build and we improve upon every day takes into consideration the things that you're struggling with in your environments, and we build this into our solutions to make them simpler, more streamlined. So architecture, why do we complement MDM, but why are we simpler and why are we more streamlined? Because we're a hybrid solution. So everything that you do when you provision a device is a set of instructions. An example would be, I want to erase the device, I want to put it on Wi-Fi, then I need to contact DEP, right, and get it MDM enrolled. Maybe I want to put a background on there, set a locale, right? All those things, some of them are manual interventions, but a lot of these requirements, right, are either done at a provisioning or staging location, or they're done at the ward locations, right? So why is this simple? Because the set of instructions are created in the cloud, right? We create a very secure cloud instance that outlines the instructions, and we push the instructions and the automation down to a local level. So about 90% of our customers are window shops. They have an existing PC sitting in the nurse's ward, and they basically install the software agents called the Launchpad, and they install this lightweight agent on that existing PC. You can share those same resources. And those Launchpads, those agents, host the actual instructions, the automation. We also cache the operating system signature files. So your OS updates don't come down over the Wi-Fi network. They're actually cached and locally available, right, on that PC. That PC is hardwired connected to a dock. So you can have 24, 48 devices which are connected to that PC, and they are simultaneously doing OS updates, they are doing app updates, they're provisioning or reprovisioning devices or making changes. Once again, this is much easier and simple and streamlined than trying to do this over the air. MDM can kick off an OS update, but each device is going to call out and ask for that 2 or 4 gigabyte file each and every time. This has a tendency to choke your network. You get failures. I mean, I've learned this from experience from doing 7 years of MDM deployments, right, at healthcare organizations. So we learn what works and doesn't work. And honestly, the MDMs have all come to us when we were GroundControl, now being Imprivata Mobile, and said, how do we make this better? You seem to have a great solution that will work in conjunction with us. And that's what we built. So think about the local caching of all this data and information that you need to update those devices locally versus over the air. So if you take an example, and I'll give you one from the States. Once again, they're expanding out into Europe and Middle East, is Johns Hopkins. So 2 years ago, Johns Hopkins came to us and said, we've got patient iPads, okay, and we need to deploy them to all the clinical wards. We also need those iPads to be used for clinicians to do training and other duties. So how do I get 2,500 iPads deployed in 3 months? Oh, by the way, I have 100 locations, right? And so this needs to get done very, very quickly. They implemented GroundControl. They have Workspace ONE as an example for MDM. They have Workspace ONE, Intune, and Jamp. So Jamp is managing their Macs, Intune was managing their BYOD, and Workspace ONE is handling their corporate and shared devices. So they use Workspace ONE in conjunction with GroundControl to deploy 2,500 iPads to 100 locations, and he did it with at half of a person. What does that mean? That basically, if you took the time, it would take about 3 or 4 people several months to do this because they need to do it in a very short window of time. They did this with pretty much a half staff over the course of 30 days. So this was a great implementation. They're a referenceable account. They were always happy to talk to other customers or prospective customers about how they did it and why they chose Imprivata Mobile with Workspace ONE as their solution. So I won't cover this. This is basically the architecture in a kind of a different view. But once again, hybrid cloud solution. The Launchpad is your PC with the agent. And then you're going to have hundreds of thousands of devices within your organization in multiple locations, all interconnected, right, to this architecture. So you can push out those sets of instructions and automation to every device wherever they're located. So clinical workflows and patient workflows may or may not be applicable to you, depends on what your initiatives are. But on the right side is a typical workflow. And what happens today, it could be different. Every organization I've talked to have different controls. Some of them, they use a license, or they use keys, or they have a clipboard or a checkout sheet, but a device is handed to a clinician and they need to keep accountability of where these devices are, who's using them, when they've been returned somehow, right? So our solution's built on automation, where you basically use a badge and a badge reader, right? And you tap your badge, and depending on whether it's iOS or Android, you either tap it on the back of a device. If it's an Android device, you tap a badge reader connected to a dock if it's an iOS device, and that checks out the device. So now we have a record which we can communicate back to the MDM of what individual, what department checked out what device at what date and time, right down to the serial number. So there's accountability there, but we're also unlocking the device because it's a shared device. We don't want devices in an open state, which means we don't want the device to be freely taken by any individual, right? Sometimes they get lost, they misplaced. But if the device is locked, the only way to provision a device to a user is to tap your badge, right? So we have the identifiers, the digital identity, and the information about who took the device and when. And it's assigned to that specific clinician. And then the clinician should have a very simple workflow where once they unlock the device with the badge tap, they launch their applications. At that point, the application should be doing single sign-on. So we all know that password changes and requirements within a security organization, 60, 90 days, it's challenging for clinicians to remember who's doing what, right? What is my password? I forgot my password, I have to call the help desk. It just requires a lot of complexity. Two, it also reduces the amount of time the clinician has to service the patient. So we found over time that there is a lot of time spent by clinicians logging in and out of applications. And if you were to multiply that out by the amount of clinicians you have over a year, it gets very expensive. The numbers are a bit staggering. But clinicians burn out. They don't want to be spending a lot of time logging in and logging out of applications. So the objective is if they can just launch the apps and they're single signed into the app, no matter what app they're using, and then they can sign out of the application the same way, right? Tap a badge or return it to the dock, and we're signing out of the applications. It makes for a more streamlined clinical workflow. And two, they'll adopt the technology because it's simple to use. So in your organizations, once again, this is a more one-to-one conversation that we can have as a follow-up. We talk about what you're doing specifically for clinical workflows in your environment and how we can help streamline this. So user challenges. This is the clinical side of the house. These are the discussions you have with your CMOs, the CMIOs, right? And your clinical staff about the challenges they're having with using mobile devices. So it's not just a matter of handing a mobile device to someone and say, okay, great, you got a mobile device, you can access your information, go do your job. It needs to be simple and easy, right? So the objective of a good clinical workflow is making it very simple and easy for a clinician to access the device, access the applications and the data, right? And be able to use it for the term of their shift. 2, as I had mentioned earlier, remove the burden of break fix. If they get break fix issues, how do I solve those problems? I don't have IT resources around to address the issue. I can call up, but then I'm once again the help desk with additional spare pool requirements and also the time, right, that's spent actually calling the help desk and trying to determine or troubleshoot the problem. If you have a great break fix resolution, which is tap a button, return it, and you pick up another device, they're back in operational in a matter of seconds, right? Instead of wasting lots of time trying to resolve the technical problems. It's not their job, they're a clinician. And then once again, an easy to learn workflow. And we're going to show you a film of how this actually works. But the objective here is the workflow should be so simple that today they're using badges to probably gain physical access, right, into the hospital, or using it to access other apps. We don't want to change what they're doing today. We want to utilize the same backend technology, right, and the same workflows, but automate and streamline them in the process. So part of what Imprivata Mobile has done is created easy workflows, clinical workflows, into the present solutions that you have today. So this is just a breakdown. I mean, the user frustration, I've seen this when I've gone into hospitals pre-COVID. How are people addressing, the user management challenges? We talked about passwords being a huge problem. And once again, technology adoption. So if you hand someone a device, it should be user-friendly for them to pick up and use. Depending on the organization, some people like Android, some people like iOS. You have to know your culture and obviously your clinical staff best. But if they adopt the technology and you provide a great single sign-on experience, they will utilize that technology very efficiently. If you don't, you're going to run into other challenges where they won't adapt the technology, and obviously they'll find workarounds. So I'm going to give you a quick example. I'm going to give you an iOS example and an Android example of how easy it is to use the clinical workflow. So today, on the top right, that's an example of one of the smart docks. You have all your devices sitting in the clinical wards, right? And the clinician walks up and they're just tapping the same badge they use for other purposes. And what happens in the background is quite a few things. One, if you're using one sign, it goes out to one sign and it authenticates who the user is and delivers that information back to Imprivata Mobile solution. So it takes the device from that lock stage, right, which you see here, to an unlock stage, right, which puts the person's name, maybe their title, what department they're located in, a digital identity, as well as a serial number, whatever it is that you want is the variables to be on that device, right? If they're in the pediatric ward or cardiology ward, you can actually put a logo or a specific name on there as well. This is all done within seconds. So from the time you tap your badge to the time an actual LED light flashes, showing the clinician what device they need to pick up, in those few seconds, a lot of communication's happening. We're also talking to your MDM as well, right? Because we need to know, in this case, what Alice is in what group. And if she's in a specific group, that means she gets certain applications, restrictions, profiles, and that'll also address the variables like what logo, background, or wallpaper needs to be on that device as well. And in seconds, Alice, in this example, has this device checked out to her. She has the applications on the screen that she needs. She can launch it and single sign into the application. And it's in a matter of seconds. It's a very, very simple, easy clinical workflow, right? For her to go from a locked device that's not checked out to a checked out device that's ready to be used and to start her shift. And this is, once again, going to reduce the amount and the complexity of the challenges you're having with clinicians that, okay, the device is not, I don't know, the app's not working. I don't know when I checked out the device, who do I report to? I mean, all these manual interventions or challenges that you're having today get eliminated with Imprivata Mobile. So what I wanted to do was show you a video, and this is a video of the iOS solution, and then I'm going to go into the Android side for those who are using Android and show you how we do the same requirements and workflows with Android. So I'm going to launch the video. Good day, my name is Victor Pizzolato from Imprivata. I'm here to show you a short video on Imprivata Mobile Solutions. Healthcare is using shared devices to make patient care more efficient for their clinicians. However, with any shared device environment, it's important to add layers of security to prevent unauthorized access, diminish device displacement, and track these important assets. So today, I'm going to walk you through a brief demonstration of how Imprivata Mobile Solutions facilitates fast, secure checkout of iOS devices, iPads, iPhones, and iPods in a shared user environment. First thing you'll notice when you take a look at one of the devices that is checked into the Imprivata dock is that the device is in a locked state. When we remove the device and press the home button, the device remains locked. If you were to press the power button and recycle the device will still remain locked. I'm going to return the device back to the dock, and the device remains in a locked state. In this example, I'm Barney, and Barney would like to check out a device at the beginning of his shift. So Barney would utilize his employee badge and tap the badge against the badge reader. And in this example, the badge reader will verify my digital identity with Imprivata and assign a device to me. So I tap my badge, port 7, you can see it's green. It's now turning to blue, meaning the device is being staged for Barney. And when it blinks white, that cues Barney to pick up that device and start using it for the term of his shift. You can see Barney's name personalized on the device. I hit the home button, and it prompts me for a password requirement. So I'm going to input a very simple passcode that's specific to me. And the objective of this is to keep the device safe for the term of the use for Barney's shift. So now I have a device, and it has all the applications that are necessary for me to utilize during my shift. It's a combination of using Imprivata Mobile with MDM to assign the correct applications. I can launch an application. In this case, it's called Checkouts, and this actually monitors what devices are checked out in each department based on the individual and what have not been returned. At the end of Barney's shift, he returns the device to the docking station, and then the device goes through a reset, which will stage the device for the next user. So I won't take you through the lockups. The device is being locked up. Hold on a second here. Go back to my there we go. So the device is being locked up. It takes about 10 seconds for the device to lock up, but that's a video to show you that's real time. I mean, that's Imprivata Mobile communicating with single sign-on, one sign on the background to retrieve the badge information, authenticate the user, and then it's communicating, in this example, using Workspace ONE. It's communicating with Workspace ONE, and Workspace ONE's delivering information back so we can actually check out the device, right, for the specific use case, which is what applications, restrictions, and profiles. So that's the iOS side. The Android side is very, very similar. The difference is on Android today, we're working on some parity to do the provisioning piece. We don't provision Android devices, but what we do, and we have been doing for almost as long as GroundControl was GroundControl prior to the acquisition, is the checkout and the single sign-on. So on Android, we work on multiple types of Android devices. Android is obviously a lot more fragmented. So Zebra devices, Ascom, right? Samsung. So probably some of the same similar devices that you're using if you're on Android today. But the process of checking out is a little bit different because NFC capabilities are much better on Android than what's available on iOS. You would take that same badge, so the same video that I showed you where you're tapping your badge on a badge reader. With Android, you take the badge and you tap the back of the actual device. So the device is in a locked state, and when you tap the back of the actual device, it unlocks the device. It makes a record or keeps track of a record of what individual has accessed what device at what date and time. And at that point, it actually allows you to access the applications. And when you launch an application, you've already single signed into whatever application you have on that device that's been assigned to you. So the checkout and check-in, right, is very similar, right, in a lot of ways, but it's the clinical workflow. A clinician picks up an Android device, they want to check it out, they tap their badge on the back of it, it unlocks, right, and it allows them access to all the applications, and then they have that single sign-on, that real clean, streamlined clinical workflow. And then when they're done with the device, they basically tap the badge on the back of the device, and that device locks back up again, signs them out of the application. So it's that continual rinse and repeat, right, of using a shared device, whether it's on iOS or it's on Android, we can provide that same experience. There are other applications, obviously, that you're probably using on either iOS or Android. So you have a lot of Microsoft apps, Office 365, right? You might be providing email to people using Teams. Whatever it is that you're using, the single sign-on experience works, whether you're on a clinical app or as long as the app is set up and works with SAML, right? Or another type of integration. And we could talk in more detail about that as a follow-up. But we have lots of examples of hospitals that are using our Android solution as well today. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Andy, because Andy's going to give you some use case examples and go into a little more detail of what's happened at a few locations. So Andy?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Victor. Yeah, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the customer examples we've seen here in the UK and customers we've been working with who are rolling out mobile solutions. So the first one on screen we want to talk is actually quite tied into the current COVID crisis at Royal Surrey. And with the challenges they faced around isolation wards and the ability to service the patients on those wards, and for the patients on those wards themselves to maintain contact with their families, which we know is important when you're in a stressful situation like being in hospital. They looked to mobile to address that challenge. And there were two key areas that they addressed with this, which was number one, to provide virtual visitations on the shared mobile devices they were using, but also to ensure that those shared mobile devices could still be used for the clinical applications that they were designated for. And specifically, rather than all clinicians having to go onto an isolation ward depending on the needs of the patient, it was to be able to provide the ability for one clinician to go into the isolation ward and maintain contact with their colleagues who were not isolated, to avoid having to robe up with PPE and gloves and all of the necessary precautions they needed to take to go into the ward, to come out again. So to reduce their use on PPE, to make life a bit easier working with the devices. So the solution was a combination of three different providers. It was ourselves, Ascom, whose devices we were using, and excuse me, the Attend Anywhere application. And the single sign-on piece was really critical to this, because if you can imagine a clinician is robed up in full PPE equipment, it's very difficult to type a username and password on those tiny little keyboards that the devices had. So the ability for them to take their badge and just tap that on the back to get into the device itself and single sign on into the application was great. And then they're using the same process to hand the device over to the patient, log it in as a dedicated user for the patient to use for a virtual visit, the ability to use video conferencing or to talk to the patient, but not to store any personal data by being able to log out quickly and easily when they've finished it. So those devices could be repurposed in the context of the COVID crisis to support multifunctions quickly and easily for patients and for the clinicians as well. So I think that's a really great example of a use case around, around the COVID situation. And if we move on to the next use case, and this one is from NHS Bolton up in the north, and their challenge was, well, the situation was, I mean, the course, what thing they were trying to achieve was delivering EOBs at the bedside. Now that was part of a much bigger paper-free at the point of care drive that they were undertaking. And what they were, I mean, EOBs was the starting point, but the challenges, we say accessing the device and the application was one of the key challenges, but there was also broader challenges as well, which was to make workflows consistent across devices and mediums. So clinicians were very used to that tap in and tap out on the desktops, workstations on wheels, and it was important to have that same process there. So clinicians weren't having to learn a different process. It was the same, take your badge, tap on the device, you're into it. And also they had what might be considered a slightly digitally immature workforce, and therefore it was important that any technology introduced had to be as simple and easy to use. And it was also finally a kind of about quality, and observations is often one of those processes where it falls back to handwritten notes that might not get typed up immediately, that might get bulk entered at the end of the shift. So being able to enter e-observations at the point of care, at the time of care, was really, really critical to them. But the big challenge that they had was that the process and the devices without single sign-on was really clunky. It was actually going to take clinicians longer. It was prone to error, and because they had a very clinically led decision-making process, initially clinicians rejected the idea because it wouldn't have worked. It would have been more of a barrier and disruption than what they were willing to accept. So that's where the single sign-on piece came on. And by, again, providing that really simple ability for the clinician to follow the same process they do for a desktop, take their badge, tap it on the back, log into the device, then be able to have single sign-on into the EOBS applications they're using and any other applications that may be mobile device enabled on the device was absolutely critical. And the great thing about that is once the clinician saw this solution, and we did a very small pilot with them in a single ward, and they loved it so much that within 8 weeks we'd rolled out to 1,600 users across around 400 devices across the whole hospital. So it's clear to see that by removing those barriers to clinicians, it can make the mobile solution really attractive and really drive adoption very, very quickly. So then final one I want to just talk about is more related to the iOS platform. And I mean, Victor talked a lot about that device lifecycle management and provisioning. And the work we've been doing with Phones for Patients, who are they're like a charitable organisation, a not-for-profit, that's the word I'm looking for, a not-for-profit organisation, was around taking old kit, old tablets and mobile devices and re-provisioning them to allow patients who were in care homes and hospitals to have access to a device that they could use for communications with their families, to use for accessing social media and to things like Netflix and such like. But they were turning around a phenomenal amount of devices. I think there are over 9,000 devices now, and it just wasn't practical for them to take a donated device that may contain data from the person that donated it or the company that donated it and individually wipe them. So that really streamlined, efficient, bulk device lifecycle management process that Victor talked about was absolutely fundamental to Phones for Patients. And the result was they were able to turn around up to 600 devices an hour using this process, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. And they've been donating to a vast array of the hospitals and care homes over this period of challenge with COVID, and I think 121 hospitals and care homes to date. So I think that was just a really great little initiative to be part of and to support, but also the benefit that the iOS solution, Imprivata iOS solution can provide is really, really phenomenal. So those are just 3 really brief examples of how Imprivata Mobile can help drive adoption, help improve clinician uptake, and really kind of drive that whole paper-free at the point of care approach that healthcare is moving towards, and I think mobile and mobility is a fundamental part of. Back to you now, Victor.
Thanks, Andy. Great examples too of local installations. So I promised to take you back to an upcoming slide that showed the actual docking stations. On the once again, the Android side, you don't need a docking station, right? On the iOS side, you do need some sort of docking station, right? So you can use ones that you're using today as long as they can charge and sync. But we actually represent a line of docks as well that we support as far as both software and hardware, right? And there's different form factors. So you got multiple ports, right? You can have them in risers, you can have them on countertops. And the objective here is the form factor and the cable connections and the speed should all match what you need within your organization. So example, you know, if you had 100 ward, we're working on an organization that has 100 wards, and some wards have 8 to 10 clinicians, and then they have some bigger wards where they have over 20. So an 8-port dock would not work in a you know, over 20 ward location. So the objective is to be able to go in, and we've created a actual virtual tour. And Chris, I think you could probably send this out to all the attendees. But the virtual tour is a public virtual tour and allow you to walk through. I don't know if you've ever been on a virtual tour. You can actually walk through the showroom and actually see all of the products and the different form factors, right? And the badge readers, and you can get a very, very better understanding of what might fit within your environment if this is the direction you choose to go through. As far as MDMs, once again, this is the list of what we support. There is additional MDMs that are on our list. They're under the other tag or category that we support. So Apple has basic MDM functions, right, that every MDM basically codes or develops to. These are the ones that do the majority, and probably the majority of what's covered, I guess, across the base of attendees as well, I assume. But not every MDM is the same. So the difference is the more complex or sophisticated your workflow, the more sophisticated or the better the APIs that are needed from the MDM you're using. So you can see on the top, Workspace ONE has all of them checked off, and then the others going down the list have less. So Workspace ONE obviously works the best, but we have installations with Mobile Iron, Maz 360. A lot of people are switching to Intune, and we have initiative happening over the next couple of months that they're going to fill a lot of these check boxes. Microsoft's developing more of this functionality to work with Imprivata Mobile. And the same thing, we've checked off a couple additional boxes over the last 6-7 months with Citrix as well. So they're all trying to compete to get all of them checked off, and they're building additional APIs with the advent of obviously iOS 13 and iOS 14 that's coming out in September or October. So individual discussions about what you have and what will obviously work and how sophisticated the clinical workflow can be will depend on a more of a follow-up discussion. So auditing and accessing all the information, as I had mentioned, with certain MDMs, it comes in a single pane of glass. When you look up the user in the system, it will actually show the user, what device they're on, what date and time they checked out the device, and what device serial number is assigned to them. Others don't give you as robust of information, but we as Imprivata Mobile have access to all this information in our system. So whether it's iOS or Android, it makes no difference. You can access the system, and you can have the who, what, and where of who's managing or who's handling these mobile devices and where they at any point in time. So kind of just a summary, what do we do at Imprivata with Imprivata Mobile? So it's not just managing the device, it's really managing the device and the data security as a combination, right? And using that digital identity to be able to have very streamlined workflows. And then of course, the employee productivity, we talked about reducing your costs, increasing productivity time of your clinicians with simplified clinical workflows is what we do. It's part of our solution, and we do this really well. Your auditing and visibility, as I had mentioned, you have that as part of the solution. And then the last piece, which we really didn't talk much about, but it's really important, is loss prevention. So I've gone into hospitals where they have 10,000 devices and they're not using Imprivata Mobile, and they're trying to do this with just MDM and DEP alone. And some of them have lost up to 25% of their devices the first year. So we were actually able to show cost savings, right, in reducing your spare pool, which means you don't need to invest in that many devices. But two, the devices that you have and they're out in the clinical wards are not being lost or misplaced, right? Because there's a financial tag to them as well. So it's losing devices is not just what's lost, but it's also what's being invested in the actual spare pools. So we try to encompass our solutions around all four of those pillars. They're really important because at the end of the day, you have only a certain amount of resources, right, to complete a certain amount of work. And you need to keep your clinicians happy, right, and productive at the same time. So with that, that's the end of our presentation. We have a contact page as well, and I will turn this over to Chris.
Thanks very much, Victor. That was great. Thanks, Andy, for those use cases. Really interesting to see how people are using it. We've got some questions related to some of that, but the first question we got is, can we set time limits to lock a device after the device has been checked out?
Yes, so you have a variable that you can plug in and say, if I have a 12-hour shift, if the device is not turned back in 13 hours, do one of two things: send out email notifications with certain MDMs like Workspace ONE and Citrix. You can trigger a loss mode, which would actually locate if the device is either on Wi-Fi or cellular. It actually locate the location of the device and then lock up the device. And then you can send multiple notifications to either the individual or to department heads as well. The video also showed a checkout application that we've created in Imprivata Mobile. So the department managers, right, with their clinical staff can actually see in the application when an individual has checked in and has not checked those devices back in. But to answer your simple question, yes, that variable can be set.
Thanks, Victor. We've got a question, actually a couple of questions that relate to the docs. I think in order to answer those, I'll send out a link for the email to all attendees that does that walkthrough. That will explain how the different device models and docs work in cabinets and work, if that's okay.
Sure.
And then a couple of questions related to other use cases. One regarding infection control and sharing devices between patients and clinicians. How was the infection control element managed? I think it's probably more for you, Andy.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very good point. Yes, absolutely. There was a need for infection control between transfer, and that still happened. The ASCOM devices that were used there are full hospital grade devices, so can be wiped down with suitable cleaning products, and that process was still followed. It wasn't like the devices could just be swapped here and there and without any kind of infection control. I think what was important, the two things that are important: number one, not having to go back out again as a clinician and derobe with PPE every single time. That was one of the critical things. But to be able to remain in the ward at the time, and then be able to provide the device to the clinician if they wanted one, and then take that back to a cleaning station for proper disinfecting.
Okay, thanks, Andy. And then slightly related to that question, a question with regard to permissions in checking out the device to a clinician, but then the patient then using it. What's recorded in the audit trail in terms of the user?
Well, I mean, there are various ways you can go about it. I think one example is to have a different card for the patient. So the patient login is a very quick and very simple, straightforward, very, very restricted access user. that doesn't have permissions to access anything. And that's the great thing about the tap in and tap out on the back of the device, is it's not just a one-to-one. Once you've tapped onto the device, you can use the switching on the device whilst it's away with the Android platform. So you can have a separate card, for example, where you would tap onto the device with a very restricted user that doesn't have access to the EMR or observations applications or anything like that, just has access to the, in this case it was Attend Anywhere, to to use that functionality and that functionality alone.
Okay, thank you. A question again regarding docking solutions. Are they available for Android devices or only iOS?
No, they're available for both. So the connections on the back when you order the docking station or using USB micro, like it asks, we ask what the connection types you have, and then you can charge the device, Android devices. Today we don't sync that way, right? So we sync over the air with Android today. Once we provide a provisioning solution down the road here, we'll be able to charge and sync in the same dock. So, as long as the connection types are the same, you can put an Android or iOS device into the same dock.
And again, the link that I'll share after this, after webinar, we'll kind of do that kind of walkthrough as well. So any questions, please come back to us. There's a question about Imprivata and Windows 10. I think that's an affirmative, isn't it? We are covering Windows 10 devices.
Windows 10 devices, are you talking about the launch pad, or are you talking about the physical devices being used today?
The question is just Windows 10 devices.
So yeah, Windows 10 tablets like the Surface Go and the Surface Pro, I mean, yes, we do. The Surface Go has inbuilt NFC, but all of the other Surface devices, you'd need a separate NFC reader plugged into them.
Okay. There's one final question, which I think we'll take offline for now. One of the attendees asked about looking at the admin console, so I'll probably pick that up separately and maybe organise a one-to-one, Victor, with you and the organisation to kind of go in a little bit more deep dive. So I think that's all of the questions. I didn't see any more come in, so hopefully we've answered all those questions. So again, thank you very much, gentlemen, for those presentations. Very, very interesting, as I say. I really like this solution, and thank you especially to all the people that attended. You will see the questionnaire on the way out of the webinar. If you wouldn't mind just completing those few questions for us, that'd be very helpful. And then we will obviously pick up any individual questions outside of it. We will send the recording out to all the attendees as well. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks now.